Hello everyone! Before I get started, I would like to thank Wolfie Chocolate for becoming my first ever Patreon sponsor. I truly appreciate it. Today I'd like to talk about thinking for yourself. And I know it's kind of funny, like a guy, I'm not telling you how to think for yourself. I'm not going to tell you how to think for yourself. But before I get into this, I need to talk about a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Many of you have likely heard about these mindsets hundreds of times before, and some of you may be hearing about these for the first time. I will summarize each of them. Please look it up if you need further explanation of these. So, according to brainpickings.org, a fixed mindset assumes that our character, intelligence, and creative ability are static, meaning not change them in any way that matters. We're stuck or fixed in this mindset. Additionally, the primary focus of it is it sees avoiding failure and finding success at all costs and this is the only way to measure intelligence and skill at something: success and avoiding failure. While a fixed mindset is much easier of the two mindsets, you may already see some problems. For example, you come across a challenge, maybe you're at the gym and a weight is too heavy, or perhaps you don't know how to do something. Well, if you had a fixed mindset, you'd simply say you couldn't do it and will never be able to. And I know I'm guilty of this. Now, a growth mindset is found to create a passion for learning rather than hunger for approval. That's the major difference. The primary virtue of this mindset is that human qualities like intelligence, creativity, imagination, and relational capacities like love or friendship can be cultivated through effort and practice. Which, this totally makes sense, especially if you go back to our first two examples. You might not be able to lift that weight now, but, if you keep at it, right, you keep trying and you do lower weights and you keep going, you will be able to get it. You will be able to lift that weight. And yes, I acknowledge that this is your physical body, right, and it's not your brain, but as in with muscles, your mindset is generally what prevents you from getting to that point. You might not know how to do something. Well, it's quite simple. You probably know what I'm going to say next. I'd say that if you were taught growing up that you can do anything or be whatever you want to be, is absolutely true if you were to have a growth mindset, because you can work to that point and be or do whatever you want to do, because you don't see, what you currently can do as a limit. You don't see that you have to avoid failure, right? You're okay with failing, and that will make you more successful. I'll give a little background summary of the two main mindsets. I'd like to talk to you about what I personally call the philosophical mindset. And, this may or may not be a real thing, right? But this is what I call it, and this is what I personally want to share. So, before we get to that, I'd like to talk about what is philosophy, because a lot of people think that they may know about what it is, or heard about it, but they really don't know like how it's practical. Personally, I think you should always be, you know, using a philosophical mindset. And philosophy is defined as the study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence when considered, academically, okay? And philosophy is not, under any circumstances, to be confused with politics. Philosophy is a way of looking at the world and putting what all humans have the same on paper, specifically their beliefs and how and how they come to them, right? And that's really important, the how they get to their belief part. But what does this mean, right? So over the years, philosophers have found, right, since like the ancient Greek times, okay, Aristotle, have found that there are three fundamental rules of logic: the law of contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, and the principle of identity. And this is quoted from this is quoted from Encyclopedia Britannica. The law of contradiction, as is formally named, means that for all statements, propositions, whatever, you can't have both the original statement and the opposite of that be true, right? So that means, and this to be true, right? In your head, you don't need a 23-year-old telling you that, a fact and the opposite of the fact can't be true at the same time, right? Or a thing and the opposite of thing can't be true at the same time, right? Like, Jim is either standing over there or he isn't. There is no Jim is both there and not there. This is not Schrodinger's cat. I would like to point out that the reason Schrodinger's cat works in a logical sense is because it's referring to the future, right? So if you have a statement or whatever, right? It can be both true and untrue by a technicality, essentially, right? That all of the possibilities, right, being both of those things, right? He's either there or he isn't, are possible. But once you get to the point in which you are determining now, then it's either one or the other, and that's really important. And if that hurt your head to think about, that's why, it's either is or it isn't. That's why, that is a rule of logic, because it's something that every single human being has. You either are or you aren't. True and untrue, and it cannot be at the same time. And so now the law of the excluded middle, as it is formally named, means that going off of the first one, either a statement is true or that it isn't, right? And this goes to further specify, right, that there's no in-between or middle or partial truth, right? In other words, something is untrue if it is not wholly true, right? Completely true, okay? And this, right? So you're trying to convince somebody of something. And, whatever it is, you might leave out some information, but you're leaving out the information in an attempt to convince or manipulate them. Because that in their brain, just like you would, you're assuming, if they trust you, you're assuming that they are using this rule when you are giving them the information. They believe that what you are saying is true, and therefore, even though you might not be telling them everything, which is making it actually untrue, they would believe it to be true. Which, this is how politicians work, and why, everybody, the media, journalists, whatever, ourselves need to be able to freely investigate and search to find if there's a partial truth, if they're trying to make up a partial truth. Because if it isn't correct, if it isn't right, then it isn't wholly right. So then the third one, the principle of identity, as it is formally named. This one's a little bit more confusing, and I'm going to try to explain this. If a statement is true of, some variable, right, then inversely, that variable, whatever it is also true of the statement. So this might be confusing, but here's like a super simple example, right? A potato is a plant, right? A plant can also be a potato, right? It can be an apple or, whatever else, but like a plant can be a potato, right? And because that's your variable, the plant. And as you may have noticed, I didn't say the plant is a potato, right? Because not all plants are friggin' potatoes, okay? So, like I said, an apple is not a potato. Unless you're speaking French, then, like, apple, in French is le pomme, and potato in French is le pomme de terre, which is the apple of the earth. But it's still, clearly separate things. Like, a watermelon definitely isn't a potato, but that's something good to look at because most logical fallacies occur in this rule of logic, right? In this law of logic. And so I'll use Portland as an example, right? Because it's what's going on right now. Like, so here would be the statement and the variable. An anarchist vandalized the businesses and the federal building and claimed they were a protester, right? In the name of protest, right? Well, then you could falsely say protesters vandalized businesses, right? You switch it around. And the federal building because they're anarchists. And so you can see that that's clearly not true, right? But that is the argument that a lot of people are trying to make because they're falsely um, trying to apply this logic, and it's really attractive to want to. It's really attractive to want to do it that way and oversimplify and generalize, but it's unfortunate. But you can't. It's not a thing that works. And you know this is true, right? Obviously, that tree over there is that tree, and that rock is that rock. But we as humans want to generalize and easily can get swept up in creating these logical fallacies because of whatever reason. Um, emotions such as really strong emotions like anger or jealousy can get in the way of us seeing logically, right? Love. And so now I'm going to talk about the second major part of philosophy. Um, Ethics are moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Right, this is a dictionary definition. And, first off, there are tons of differing ethics, morals, and honestly, to me, there's no wrong answer if you can use logic to explain it. And that's so saying, well, I don't believe that. It simply will not cut it. A simply put and generalized example, okay, would be vaccines. Do they work? Yes. Why? They are vigorously tested before being available to the general population. Should I get them? Yes. Why? They keep you from getting diseases, and if you do get the disease, you have a significantly low you have it for a significantly lower time and with less impact to your immune system and body. And you could say, well, I don't believe that. But you would have to follow, exactly as I did, the logical steps to prove via using those 3 rules with your, with known facts, obviously, that say to the contrary. And frankly, there aren't any. And you could be like, well, that one vaccine failed. But that means if you're looking at the rule of logic, your entire argument is invalid because you're arguing something that isn't what we're arguing. Look at the law number 2 again. And the last thing, right? Notice I said why a lot after answering the question with a yes or a no or whatever. That's super important for what I call philosophical mindset. You need to want to dig deep further than a growth mindset because you want to understand. You want to understand where someone's coming from and where they may be headed because of that. And if they're going down an illogical or unethical path, then you might be able to find out where they or yourself were started down this. So what I'm going to ask you to do, because I do it myself every single day, I'm going to ask you to not get offended or frustrated. And if you do, then that is totally okay. And it's understandable because there's a 23-year-old telling you how to think. I get offended and I get frustrated myself, so I am obviously far from perfect. But the point is that I am trying to improve as you should. Because we all recognize that a fixed mindset is not what we should have. We should not be seeking to just simply avoid and ignore failure and only looking at success, right, of whatever little tiny thing is the only way to measure anything, because it's not, and it's not. It's not. I want to thank all of you for listening, commenting, liking, subscribing, and improving yourself and the world. Because, my next video is going to be a continuation of this, where I'll talk about, asking why, when you should ask why, and how to determine if the answer should be acceptable. And this isn't telling you like, okay, here's an exact, way to do this thing or how you have to do it. It's not that. It's letting you know that you have the capability to, think critically. And you have it. But this is how you would do it and catch yourself when you're not. I hope that makes sense. And, we're also likely to touch on determining if a source or a story is true, and, if you should be hesitant to believe it.